What's going on, everybody? My name is Gene Hunt, legendary Chicago DJ, and we're doing something for SFS Magazine. Uh, Today, basically, we're just going to be talking about some things in my legacy, how long I've been playing music and my passion and my desire for it. And, I'm Chicago native, of course. And Chicago is the mecca of house music where it was created and established back in the early 80s and so forth. And I'm just here to basically just give you tad bits of my history, and my insight and some of my personification, of how I interpreted house music growing up as a teenager. And basically, I started like in the early 80s, mid 80s. And I was hanging out with some guys that were a little bit older than me. They were going to Simeon, as a matter of fact. And they were going to these house parties. And I was like, man, I really want to go. And they're like, you're too young to go to these parties. Why would I be too young to go to the party? So they was like, all right, you can go. So this is when I kind of got my first taste of, actually going to a house party. So I saw the way these kids were dressing, the box haircuts, and how they had like this different personification of this music that they listen to. And I'm like, well, this is house music. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. But just how they dressed, the way that they danced, the atmosphere, I thought that was extremely enlightening. So it struck me. When I was younger, my grandmother and my mom would say I wouldn't leave the house without a record. I would always have like a 45 or whatever on my tricycle. I would always play with records. She said, boy, you'd never leave the house without a record. So I guess, as a child growing up, I was always fascinated with music. Some of us had like those big component sets like in the house, where you got the turntable on it, and you got the 33, the 45, and the 78, RPM with the big platter, with the 8-track cassette and all that. So my grandma was like, you always like to go over there and, mess around with it and this and that. So I guess it was already in me, for some aspect to do music, providing the fact that I wouldn't leave the house without a record. So for some strange reason, it called me, it grabbed me. I just got, totally intrigued and wanting to hear different aspects of music, and so, like, certain things would come on the radio when I was a kid. I was like, I want to hear that song again, but it was the radio, so I didn't understand any of those things. So it's something that's been in my passion. It's always been something that's been an inspiration for me. But I would have never, ever known, that it would meet this expectation that it has met, musically. I think I did my first gig, maybe 1984, 1985, when I, just started. Of course, I had to go through those stages of learning how to play. So I would go over different people's houses and mix on their equipment, because at that time I didn't have my own gear or have my own stuff. So, I would go down to Imports or go down to Loop Records, and those were the record stores where people obviously used to shop to get their music. Gramophone was something that was a little bit later. But I remember going to Loop on State Street, and I would bring my cassettes down there, and I'd be like, I'd give them to Jesse. Jesse was the guy that was, behind the counter. And I was like, I want this track right here, Jesse. I want this track. So I put my tape in, and he'll listen. Oh, Gene, it's over there on the shelf. That record right there. You want that, you want that. And then I can kind of recall, the records were not expensive as records are now, obviously. I mean, back in my day, like in the early 80s, a domestic copy, of a 12-inch or EP or what have you, would be like, I would say maybe $3 to $5, for a record. That was beautiful. But if you wanted like an import per se, something that was, overseas, some Italian disco, or a record that was imported, like overseas, you would probably pay about $7 to $10, for the record. But you didn't care. This is what you wanted. So, some DJs will buy double copies, they'll have two copies, because some guys would like to actually mix and scratch and do all those type of things. certain collectors per se would buy doubles. Well, I'm gonna play this one. I just keep this one on the wall or a shelf if you're a collector or so forth. So going down the loop and going down the imports, that was the thing, to go down there and go record shopping. And so like some of the stuff that you would hear on the radio that you like, you go down and grab you a couple copies. And so I started to learn how to collect vinyl. And that was like a very big thing for me, as far as collecting records and so forth. I started, like really getting like very influenced with doing music. I would say probably like 7th or 8th grade. I was going to parties that I wasn't old enough to get in, but that's a whole nother segment. I mean, it was the drive and the passion, and just the desire and the hunger that I had, to be able to come out and play parties. Luckily, my parents were cool enough to where the factors that they would let me go out to these house parties and stuff like that. So I just started venturing off and going to different parties, and they would hang like poster boards. They would hang poster boards and pass out flyers and so forth. And my thing was, I would like collect the flyers to the parties, and I would call and I would inquire. Would always have a number on there for more information. And some of these places, I like leave messages like, I'm a DJ, I want to try. So that was kind of like my thing. I was hungry. I had a killer instinct and a desire to want to be able to play at some of these events. So some of these people would actually call me back, but I was extremely persistent. I remember one time I was talking, I think it might have been Lou Lewis. He's like, I had to call you back, but you called about 75 or 76 times on the phone. So I'm like, it has to be something to this, And I was just persistent. I wouldn't give up. I obviously understood that there were other. This is a big commodity and something that contained value to me. And I was just persistent at it. So he called me up one day. Hey, how you doing? Got your message or whatever. Come on by. Let me check you out. So, I bring my demo over. He checks my demo out. So now I have an opportunity. So I think that's very valuable. Like today, like in today's industry, it's a tad bit different. I think back in that era in the '80s, like when I was playing, it was more or less, a working session. We had house music on the radio or so forth, but we didn't have like those outlets like Traxsource, Beatport. You had to go and dig. You had to go find. You had to hustle. You had to shop to get your records. And then, also back in the '80s, like in my era, we didn't really have the technology. The laptop wasn't invented back then. There wasn't no laptops. There wasn't no CD players. There wasn't no controllers. All that stuff was obsolete. It didn't exist. You had a pair of 1200 turntables, Techniques. Some guys used the reel-to-reel, tape decks with pitch controls. That's how we were able to exploit new music and demos and so forth. You come to the party, you hook your tape deck with the pitch control up, or you hook your reel-to-reel up, and that's how we were able to break new music and create music in that stature. Obviously, we didn't have internet. The internet wasn't there, so you didn't have an outlet to go to Beatport or Bandcamps and Traxsources and things of that nature. This stuff didn't exist. You would just have to listen to the radio, go out to some of the parties to listen to what at that time the bigger DJs were playing, and that's how we obviously got educated, and we kind of got into that segment of being able to merge disco into electronic sound, which is house music when you're making a drum machine. But then later on down the line, of course, you get all these interpretations of EDM, techno, and all this other stuff. Everything is just, it came from one solid scenario, and then it broke off into particles, and that's when it started to get labeled or tagged as being a certain sound of music. So Chicago was primarily known for house music, just based on the sounds of people having house parties and grabbing a drum machine, put some riffs, or having somebody come over, play a synthesizer or something of that nature. So we started making like our own sound and started to pattern our drum programming, and you got your 909 or 808 or any Roland drum machine, and you would just sit up and hook you up a keyboard or whatever you had. If you had a Juno 101 or a Jupiter 6, most of the gear was like the Roland gear. Roland was known for drum machines, synthesizers, and so forth. So, and then even back in the days, Pioneer was known for, reel-to-reels. I had a couple of reel-to-reels, TAC reel-to-reels, Tascam 4-tracks, and all that type of stuff. So analog tape was something that was very prestigious back in the day. Now you got these hard disk recorders with all these gigabytes, and you can record like these built-in hard drives where there's no tapes required. We used to actually record on 1-inch, 2-inch tape, Ampex, reel-to-reel, 2-inch tape. So this was more of an analog scenario. And what I mean by analog, if people don't understand the concept of that, it's when you have something that's used from a tape form. It's like playing a record versus playing an MP3. The fidelity and the sound of it is a lot more as opposed to digital. It's more of a process sound, which means it gets broken up into bytes, so it won't have that warm texture like analog. So some people still record in analog, and some people prefer to have it more digital. But at the end of the day, it's what